Journey to the Unknown Through the Vortex. Chapter 6. First Encounter. Ryan, viewers, we are so fortunate to be able to interrupt our program with a guest calling in from Tijuana, Mexico. And who do we have but the reporter who survived of the very recent chopper incident there, and Waterston, calling in from Tijuana on M-Video. And, so tell us what happened to you and the rest of your crew. And, Ryan, thanks for having me on the program. Yes, I am alive and well, but my colleagues have gone missing, or at least I do not know where they are at present. But I have someone to thank for me being here at all. I want everyone to meet Dr. Ken Harding, who can make sense of all of this we are encountering. Ken, hi everyone. And nudged him and then held him by his shoulders and moved him closer to the laptop camera. Ken, oh, I have to be in the camera view. Thank you, Ryan, for inviting me to appear on your program. Ryan, Dr. Ken, your theory is that the events first in Tijuana and now Los Angeles are related? What are we seeing at these locations? Ken, maybe the audience does not know is that their first appearance was 2 days ago in Orlando. Ryan, in Orlando? Why have no news channel picked it up? Ken, the police thought it was an accident due to the storm with lightning damage and all. A kid disappeared during the incident, or more accurately because of the incident, and is still missing. So, all everyone can think of is finding the kid. But we know nothing about these light clouds that appeared during the incident. And, can you have the film footage shot of the incident? Ryan, we have uploaded to your network server as previously arranged. Ryan, viewers, this is raw footage of the scene at the Super Slide location in Orlando where the child went missing. I have to warn the audience that the footage will be alarming and even shocking to some of you. The film then showed over the network and went viral within seconds on all forms of social media. The White House press secretary's assistant received a call on his mobile from a friend at CNBK Network who wanted to speak to the press secretary John Cotton. John, I just received a call from CNBK about the strange light clouds that have appeared in Los Angeles. Some expert has information on these clouds and has a video on a previous occurrence in Orlando. That video has some unbelievable views on it. John clicked on the remote to the TV in his office and watched with incredulity on the images flashing on the screen. He picked up his direct line to the Karen White, the president's personal aide. John, Karen, I wish to speak to the president. There is news on CNBK about some strange lights over an area in LA which I think he should know about. Karen put him through to the White House Chief of Staff John Lane, who picked up the call, listened for a few seconds and then spoke to Chris Walker, President of the United States of America. Mr. President, I am sorry to interrupt, but John Cotton says there is something most important on CNBK Newsflash right now. Susan caught the nod from the president and picked up the TV remote. A few punches at the handheld remote and the channel for CNBK News was on screen. The president and the assembled group took good notice of what was showing. The Homeland Secretary Richard Brent shook his head and spoke, Mr. President, we cannot be sure if this is not some prank being played by youngsters. We are busy with the radiation spikes we are monitoring at Diablo Nuclear Power Station. The press secretary John Cotton, who had joined the meeting by this time, pointed to the screen and remarked, Mr. President, I think we should talk to this and Waterston and Ken Harding. They were at the scene of at least one of these other incidents, Tijuana, I understand. The President, are the radiation spikes at Diablo Canyon related to these incidents? Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Stanton, there were briefly sightings of clusters of cloud formations with purplish/blue lights hovering over the reactors when the radiation readings spiked. But these sightings could not be confirmed, and when we sent a chopper, nothing was observed. VP Rowan, and what was the timing of these relative to the sightings at the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant? Homeland Secretary Richard Brent, Diablo Canyon sightings were just after the incident in Tijuana but before LA. President Walker, why did we not take notice of these before? Every bit of information may help. He turned to John Cotton and said, get that and Waterston and Ken Harding over to the White House ASAP. Then he turned to the Homeland Secretary, Richard, related or not, LA situation may get worse. If there is any cause and effect of their appearance at various locations, then we need to evaluate the threat level from these unknown clouds of light. Defense Secretary Ian Smith, in that case may I recommend to the President that you authorize the Governor to mobilize the California National Guard to Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant as a contingency measure should these things show up there too. President Chris Walker: Yes, Kate, please put a call through to the Governor of California later. I like to speak to him on this issue. The National Security Advisor, Kate Boswell, made a note of this for follow-up after the meeting. A call was put through to the switchboard of CBNK from the White House operator. This is the White House calling. The press secretary wishes to speak to the guests on your news program with Ryan Cummins. The call was patched through to the program director Scott West. After getting the message from the press secretary himself, Scott called Ryan on his earpiece and cut into the commercial while he explained the situation to him. Ryan, we have White House calling and the President is requesting both Ann and Ken to return to the USA and go to the White House ASAP. Ryan, the professional he is, came back on air after the commercial. All of you folks out there, we just have to interrupt our program as both Ann and Ken will have another serious engagement, such as a plane to catch. The commercials cut in and then Ryan relaxed and spoke to Ann and Ken, who were still on the line. Ryan, Ann and Ken, the White House have summoned the both of you. They are setting up a committee to look into these light clouds and you are their star witnesses. Fort Irwin, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment base in Southern California. Colonel Rick Owens' PA buzzed him and said, "Sir, General Robert Wayne is on the line." Colonel Owens picked up the direct line to Task Force HQ at Nellis Air Force Base and Brigadier General Robert Wayne's voice came on. "Colonel Owens, this is General Robert. We just received mobilization orders from the Joint Chiefs for the 11th to deploy at Sun Valley. Task Force HQ will be issuing the detailed orders through the CTTS, Combat Tactical Communications System." Colonel Owens: General Robert, my orders just received through the Tactical Ops Communications Network was for the 11th to deploy to Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Station. General Robert: No, that is why I am calling you direct. We are amending your orders. 11th need not deploy to Diablo Canyon. The Army National Guard is already instructed to mobilize to Diablo Canyon even though the situation is stable there. But the situation is heating up at Sun Valley and the 11th is the readiest unit we have right at this moment. We need you at Sun Valley. Colonel Owens: Yes, sir. I will have my executive officer get the Black Horse Regiment ready. The sirens went off at all the barracks and parade grounds of the Black Horse Regiment. The officers gathered at the briefing room for their orders to be given to them. Half an hour later the NCOs with all the men were assembled in a maintenance hangar to get their orders. In under 2 hours, the 1st Squadron of the 11th Armored Cavalry rolled out of Fort Irwin with military police advanced contingent to clear the traffic along I-15 and CA-210W. A convoy of M1A2 Abrams battle tanks and M901 ITVs and M2A3/M3A3 Bradley armored personnel carriers together with support squadron formed a single vehicle formation. 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Squadrons took up the rear in a line of vehicles stretching for almost 2 miles. On reaching Sun Valley, the 1st and 2nd Squadrons and support squadron headed for the northern perimeter of Sun Valley location of the scrapyard where the light clouds have showed up, while 3rd and 4th Squadrons moved to the southern perimeter. Colonel Rick Owens and the Battle Command vehicle rolled past the gate of the compound of the scrapyard where the light clouds have appeared, followed by the rest of the 1st Squadron. The 2nd Squadron stayed in the rear and established a perimeter around the boundary walls of the scrapyard. Colonel Owens stood in the command APC and pointed his binoculars at scene in front of the 1st Squadron. Heaps of cars in neat rows on one side of the main pathway into the compound, with neat slabs of crushed and compacted cars were stacked up in massive piles on the other side. Colonel Owens dropped his binoculars and just stared at the scene in front of him. There were these glowing clouds of light floating over the pile of crushed cars, and tentacles were extending from these clouds and lighting up the stacks of cars below. Colonel Owens aimed his vehicle's multi-frequency spectrum camera at the light clouds and spoke into his headset. Colonel Owens, calling all Black Horse units, all squadrons report in. 1st Squadron, in position. 2nd Squadron, in position. 3rd Squadron, in position. 4th Squadron, in position. Support Squadron, in position at standby area. Colonel Owens, Command Center, 11th is in position and sending optical and digital telemetry now. General Robert Wayne implemented the Joint Chiefs orders and set up the Tactical Command Center at Nellis Air Force Base. The optical and data telemetry gathered from the battlefield tactical surveillance and communication stations was patched through to the main command center at the Pentagon and the White House. General Robert Wayne gave the instructions to the operators of workstations, each in charge of one of the 11 squadrons: run the data through the supercomputers at the Pentagon. I want a full analysis and feed the data through the control desk right here in this command center. Run a feed to the main command center at the Pentagon and on the White House secure line. In addition, General Robert Wayne patched all the live video feed to the White House Situation Room, where the President, Cabinet and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the National Security Council members were watching the 11th Cavalry Regiment in action. At the White House Situation Room were the President Chris Walker, Vice President Kevin Rowan, Secretary of State Jim Davis, Defense Secretary Ian Smith, Homeland Security Secretary Richard Brent, National Security Advisor Kate Boswell, Joint Chiefs General Stanton, and the rest of the National Security Council. Invited was the Special Advisor to the National Security Council of the White House, Professor Gerald Brown, Nobel laureate for physics. The duty officer punched the security code into the remote when prompted. The digital downloaded the images onto the large HD screens. The images that came through were of high resolution and showed the scene at the scrapyard. Target telemetry was also indicated at the bottom of the screen display. General Stanton announced proudly to the President and Cabinet, "Mr. President, the 11th Armored Cavalry is on site in force and is able to handle all situations. We have set up an operations center in the Pentagon and we are receiving a live feed from the signals they are receiving via satellite from the site in Los Angeles." The images on the screen showed the light clouds hovering over the cars in the scrapyard in Sun Valley, LA, and the cars were shimmering in a cloud of blue light. Suddenly an increased intensity of light burst out, and a gasp from the attendees. An entire car just vanished, and this happened again in a quick succession. Richard Brent asked in hushed tones, "Did you all see what happened to that car?" President Chris Peters looked at Professor Gerald Brown. "Professor, what did we just see?" VP Kevin Rowan, "And what threats do those things present?" Gerald Brown looked intently at the images and asked, "General Stanton, who is in direct control of the troops on the ground, I need to speak with the ground commander." A few quick calls and Professor Brown spoke on the direct phone link with Colonel Rick Owens. "Professor Brown, Colonel Owens, this is Professor Brown, Scientific Advisor to the National Security Council. I need you to do exactly as I asked you to." Colonel Owens, "Yes sir, we are fully prepared here for all actions and options. Tell me what you need, and the 11th Cavalry will certainly get it done." Professor Brown, "Colonel, I understand that your command vehicle has a multi-frequency spectrum analyzer. Can you link up to all of the sensors fitted on your vehicle, take full frequency sweeps and transmit the data back to Operations Center?" Colonel Owens, "Yes sir, we will do that." Within a few minutes, the data began streaming into the White House TV screens. Professor Brown turned to the President and Vice President. "I am sorry that I did not answer you, Mr. President and Mr. Vice President, but the strange events we are viewing has no parallel in the history of mankind, and I am afraid myself and my colleagues on the Council have no answer for you right now. We need a lot more information and data before we can draw any conclusions." John Cotton came into the room with two persons and announced aloud, "Mr. President, Ms. Ann Waterston and Dr. Ken Harding as you requested." And Ken went up to President Chris Walker and shook his hand. "And, Mr. President, Ken and I are so grateful for your aids to provide an escort to get from the airport and cut through all the rush hour traffic." Ken nodded his head in agreement. "Ken, Mr. President, I would like to say thank you and that I would like to join in the discussions about these light cloud phenomena immediately." John Cotton ushered them to the conference table and sat them down next to Professor Brown, but Ken stood up, went to the whiteboard, and started making notes and diagrams. He coughed and cleared his throat and was ready to address those present in the White House Situation Room. Just at that moment, there were noises of a commotion being transmitted through the speaker system in the conference room. Everyone looked away from the whiteboard and stood up to focus on the HD TV showing images from Sun Valley location. Ken returned to his seat to take in the incredible images from Sun Valley. Colonel Rick Owens peered through his binoculars at the scene unfolding before his eyes. About 2,000 feet ahead, the light clouds were putting on a spectacular light show. Two of the light clouds were drifting over the stack of car slabs just under the high voltage cables. Tentacles extended upwards and contacted the high-voltage cables while another set extended downwards to contact the metal car slabs. Sparks flew and explosions of white light and shimmering color were emitting from the clouds. Whole stacks of car slabs were hidden from view by the explosions of light and color. Within a second or two, the emission subsided, the view was immediately clear. The car slabs had disappeared. For the next few minutes, Professor Brown scrolled through the data on the LCD screen in front of him. He kept scribbling notes on his pad and conferred with his assistants looking at the same data at his university laboratory. Ken stood up from his seat and wanted to address the National Security Council members and all present in the Situation Room, but Professor Brown kept everyone's attention on one conversation after the other. Finally, Professor Brown walked to the front of the conference room and ignored what Ken had written and used another part of the whiteboard and started his own diagrams and equations. Professor Brown, ladies and gentlemen, this is an untested hypothesis on the origin of these light clouds, but here goes. These light entities are probably entities from another planet or dimension. In view of their aggressive actions at present, we should not trust in their intentions. The cars they are making disappear may be due to acquisition of materials to assemble some sort of weapon to use against us. A quickly whispered conversation between the Defense and Homeland Secretaries and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the consensus was for some quick tactical move to counter this apparently escalating situation on the ground. As a group, they raised their views to the president. Richard Bowen spoke first. Mr. President, according to Professor Brown, if these entities are indeed acquiring materials to create some sort of weapon, then a preemptive strike on these cloud entities is the correct decision to make. The president turned to Professor Brown and asked aloud, Professor Brown, according to what you just presented about the probable intentions of these cloud entities, are there other options? For example, can we try to communicate with them? Professor, yes, of course we can try, but I would certainly recommend that we prepare for a preemptive quick strike should communications fail to halt their actions. I have contacted and polled all the members of Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, and the majority concur with the view that these entities may be gathering materials and energy to create some weapon for an attack on Earth. Ken Harding stood up and walked right up to the group around the president. He waited for a few moments for his presence to be acknowledged, as the members of the military establishment and their scientific supporters continued to give different views to the president, but all invariably supporting a preemptive strike. Ken raised his voice and cut into the ongoing discussions. Ken, Mr. President, gentlemen, I do not agree with all here. These entities are not some advanced contingents sent here to Earth to prepare for an invasion. Professor Brown, Dr. Harding, we do not wish to question the authenticity of the video footage Ms. Waterston provided to CNBK of the sightings at Tijuana, but your hypothesis of these entities that you raised at your interview is pure conjecture at best and most likely to be absolute wishful thinking. Or do I need to remind you of the last time we spoke at National Physics Convention after your proposed conference paper was rejected by me and the council members? Now, what was the subject matter? Oh yes, alternate universes and dark matter. Mr. President, I propose we do something to stop them. Ken Harding ignored Professor Brown and walked to the whiteboard to draw some diagrams on the whiteboard. General Stanton, Mr. President, the U.S. Armed Forces are ready to execute your orders. Our recommendation is to launch a limited strike to test the response of these entities. President Christopher Walkers, I will only authorize a very limited action just for that purpose. Ken turned to the assembled audience and pleaded, No. No. We must not do anything rash. From my observations so far of their behavior, their likely reaction will be rather most unpleasant. General Stanton, Mr. President, we need to observe the actions of these things. They do not seem to be stopping. I strongly recommend we follow the advice of the National Security Council members as recommended by Professor Brown and allow the U.S. military to execute a limited strike. President Walker looked around the table, and except for Ann and Ken, the facial expressions of all present were in favor of doing something. He turned to the VP Kevin Rowan and asked, Kevin, what do you think? VP Kevin Rowan, Mr. President, we need to test the reactions of these things. Cannot just sit and wait for the situation to unfold. Ken Harding, no, everyone, listen to me. What we do may not do any good. I am most afraid it may create some reaction that will be most unfavorable for us. President Walker, Professor Brown, any consequences if we let the military take a pot shot at these things? Professor Brown, Mr. President, we need to see how they react to our active intervention to their feeding process. May I suggest maybe firing a single round just to test their response? President Walker, General Stanton, go ahead, limited strike.